Big Séance Podcast, episode 43.
Welcome to the Big Séance Podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
Welcome, friends. Thank you for pressing play today and checking out this 43rd episode of the Big Séance Podcast. As of today, it is officially October. It has honestly been the season of fall for me for a long time now, actually. I usually kick into fall mode sometime in September, and sometimes even in August. But there's no denying it, it's here now. The leaves here at the house have been falling like snow already, and so walks with Merrill, my four-legged son, have become very crunchy, which is kind of pleasing to the ears. And if the temperatures would just stay cooler, that would make it even more autumn-like. But it's definitely time to start scheduling some time to watch some of the traditional spooky movies, and my candles have been working overtime for sure. My Halloween altar and decorations, I must confess, I'm a little behind on this year. I usually make a big deal about it and would have posted pictures online by now. I just haven't gotten there yet, and I hope you'll still like me. But probably by the time you're hearing this, we will have gone to the pumpkin patch for our traditional family of pumpkins. I love my trips to the pumpkin patch, and if you follow me online, I usually post photos for folks to see there. So what did you get yourself into today by clicking play? Well, if you checked out the previous episode, you were able to hear my super interesting and slightly controversial conversation with paranormal investigator and demonologist Keith Johnson. Keith and the paranormal research team that he was with at the time were the first investigators on the scene of the now famous farmhouse that was featured in the very popular film, The Conjuring. So Keith shared the experiences that he and his fellow team members went through. Well, they ended up bringing in Ed and Lorraine Warren for help. They understood at the time that it would be a joint investigation, but in a disappointing turn of events, the Warrens gave the Perrin family an ultimatum. If they wanted the Warrens to help them out, then Keith and his team would not be involved. We cleared up some of the myths of Bathsheba, and that included information that was shared with me by the current owner of the farmhouse. And we even talked a bit about Andrea Perrin's wonderful book trilogy, House of Darkness, House of Light. In today's episode, I bring to you the rest of my conversation with Keith. In this portion of the interview, we focus specifically on his work in the field of demonology. You'll also get to learn just what kind of nerd Keith is, and I know you won't want to miss that. I'll be back a little later with some listener feedback. So let's get to it, shall we? Part 2 of my conversation with Keith Johnson. So you were very young then, and
Yes.
you clearly did these events lead you to your work and interest in demonology, or were you already kind of involved in that at that time?
I was involved with it. We had some, of course, activity in our house. It wasn't constant. It wasn't the Amityville horror, but you knew something was there. And it started revealing itself that it was not very nice. And I believed that it was an unholy spirit. And I had been praying about this for quite some time. And I had a premonition that a case was coming that we were going to be involved with, that I was going to be sent to help some family. I did have a premonition about that. I didn't have any details about it, of course, but when we were contacted, when the call came, I was not totally taken by surprise. It didn't lead me into this, but it solidified it for me. It solidified it for me that I was on the right track, that this was not my imagination, that people do need help, that families are sometimes very, very frightened by the activity, and they have sometimes nowhere to turn. Look at the Perron family. The church had turned its back on them. That's why paranormal investigators come in. That's why people who are involved in demonology come in. Now, it's supposed to be the other way around. Ideally, it's supposed to be that the church becomes involved, and if necessary, they send somebody who is involved in demonology, who can do this safely, who will go in and investigate a home, and if they find out there is activity, they submit a report to the church, and then the church takes action from there. But in our experience, my wife Sandra and I, it's a lot of the times it's the church doesn't want to become involved, so they turn to people like us, and hopefully we can get the church involved. Doesn't always work, but we do try. And the first time I did try to get church involved was with Ed Warren. This was a little later on, but Ed Warren had sent me out to find a priest, so that's what I did. Not for the Perron case, but this is shortly afterwards.
So let's get into some demonology stuff, shall we?
Sure.
I don't know how I feel about the concept of hell or demons and exorcisms, and my experiences have led me to believe that though there may be negative energy and spirits out there, just as there are negative people walking the earth, as you hear people say all the time, Satan and the devil seem very fictional to me. And, I grew up in a religious family and kind of grew out of that. I grew up Baptist and have some experiences with that. As a demonologist, tell me why I'm wrong in thinking that those characters are fictional.
Well, in my belief, my personal belief, my faith, and my personal experience from what I've experienced, the devil is a real personality. I mean, people have their own demons, of course, which is a psychological reference. People have their own emotional baggage, which we call personal demons. However, I do believe that Satan is an individual character, separate from humanity, that he was originally a glorified angel in God's kingdom, and that he rebelled against God, wanted to set himself in God's place and be like the Most High, be like God. And he actually convinced many legions of other angels to follow him in this rebellion. There was a war in heaven. It's very, very mysterious, but these angels were cast out. Satan and his angels were cast out, and they're given their place upon the earth. And I believe that the devil wants people to think that he doesn't exist. He's just a mythological character. And look at this ancient cartoon character. He's got cloven hooves, and he breathes fire, and he's got horns, and he's got a pointed tail. And Satan actually loves that. I believe that personification of Satan loves that image because it makes him seem like a cartoon character. And what more way to deceive people? And of course, Scripture says that Satan can appear as an angel of light if he so desires, and so can his followers, his fallen angels that fell with him. There's very, very mysterious things. The Bible doesn't explain it all, but it does give us enough information to know that Satan and many of the angels that fell with him are different personalities. They are individual created beings. There were some of these very high angels that were given a place to watch over humanity during the early part of the human existence, after creation and after man was created. They were called watchers, and these watchers basically looked over mankind, watched over mankind, but kind of got a little too obsessed with mankind and wanted to take on human characteristics, and apparently went so far as to actually interfere with the bloodline, interfered with our genetics, began copulating with human women. And of course, it's not just in the Judeo-Christian belief. There's many, many cultures, as I'm sure you know, believe that there was interference with humanity. They call them the Titans, of course, in Greek mythology. But these great beings, these godlike beings that were very, very, for godlike beings, they were very, very human too. They had human desires, and they became very, very involved in humanity, corrupted our bloodline, gave us much knowledge that we didn't have. They gave us advanced knowledge, and eventually sin spread throughout the world and culminated in a great flood. And of course, which destroyed the greater part of humanity. Obviously, many, many cultures have something along this line in their history or their mythology that there were these beings, titans, whatever have you, these demigods that became too involved in humanity, gave us great knowledge, befriended us, but eventually great sin developed from this, and there was a great cataclysm in the form of a flood, whereas most of humanity was wiped out, and some survivors did repopulate the earth, and chosen by God. So that's basically who I think Satan is, and in my personal belief. Satan is he's a very, very powerful being, has the wisdom of the ages. However, Satan can only he's a limited being. He's not omnipotent like God. He can only be at one place at one time. But he has many, many, countless followers. Nobody knows how many. But there are these spirit beings that became demons when they were cast out of the heavenly realm. And most of them roam the earth. Now, there are some of the angels that became demonic beings that do not roam the earth. They are in another dimension, in a spiritual prison, so to speak. For example, the Watchers. When the world was destroyed, obviously they couldn't inhabit the earth while the earth was destroyed, so they ascended back into the heavenly realms and were promptly judged and cast down, and they are in prison, so to speak, a spiritual prison, not a literal dungeon with bars, but it's referred to as a dungeon where they cannot escape, and they're reserved there until the final judgment. But most of these beings, these angelic beings that were cast out, do roam the earth, and they roam the earth as evil spirits under the control of Satan. Now, I have no idea if Satan knows who I am. It would seem unlikely, but Satan is a limited being. As powerful as he is, as wise as he is limited because he cannot be at two places at once. That's where his minions come about. Demons being spirits, they can travel very, very fast, but they are limited to what they can do. They are limited in their power. Usually, to be invited in to wreak havoc, they have to be invited in some way. They cause havoc for humanity. They're at war with humanity, and that's how they strike back at God, at their war with humanity. They despise man because man is created in God's image and man is favored by God. They attack humanity, but usually there's a reason why a house or a location has an infestation. There's something has happened, or there's some maybe ceremony or belief, some religious belief has happened where these demons were worshipped at one time, and they stay in that location. And of course, some of them are very high. Some of them have very, very high authority, like the archangels, of course. They're very high in authority. There's angels that are referred to as principalities. They're princes, and they have dominion. There are dominions, angels called dominions, and principalities. They have certain amounts of authority and power over certain regions of the earth. It's the same is true in the demonic realm. There are principalities that are demonic. There are dominions that are demonic, and they control different areas, provinces of the earth as well. So that basically they're at, and of course Jesus was sacrificed gave his blood as an atonement for man's sin, and also to destroy the works of the devil. So Satan is already defeated. He has a short time left until Christ comes again, which nobody knows, obviously, when that will be. God did not reveal that to us. But when Christ comes, he will set up his kingdom here on the earth. And so Satan knows he has a short time. He's in a rage. He's described as a roaring lion against humanity. And so he loved nothing better than us to think of, he's just a cartoon character. He's like on Underwood Deviled Ham. So that's our belief that he's just the cartoon character that likes to stroke his beard and mustache and goes around with a cape on. That's all well and good, but he can appear as a glorious angel of light, which is what he originally was. So that's my belief that Satan and his demons are personalities. They have their separate personalities, just like people have separate personalities, and they work together to do Satan's bidding, just like angels are sent by God. Of course, the word angel means, angelos means messenger. So they're God's messengers, and they watch over humanity, especially God's elect, those who believe in Christ.
I can only assume that those of us who tend to be in denial about the existence of Satan or I can only assume that it's because we're lucky enough that we haven't really had any experiences with it, So I've always said until when I do a lot of experimenting and things with spirit communication and people are always telling me why I need to be worried or why I need to be careful. And I'm like, well, maybe, but I haven't had a ton of paranormal experiences at all, let alone negative.
Right, exactly. And that's, I have a good friend. You probably are familiar with him. His name's Jeff Belanger.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah, and Jeff, of course, is a consultant and writer for Ghost Adventures. He does the historical research, which they use on the show, the settings. And he is very involved in the paranormal, but he hasn't really had negative experiences about it. He goes to these locales, and he does the writer who does a lot of research. To him, a Ouija board is nothing. It could be potentially dangerous, but it's more of a curiosity why some people have negative experiences and some people don't. He understands that some people do get overwhelmed by this. In fact, at the last function that I had together with Jeff, we're at Slater Mill. We had a function there where the public was invited, but there was a young woman that, I was my wife and I were there, my brother Carl, and we were helping give the tours, but also we were there in case anything happened. In fact, he told people at the onset, if anybody feels overwhelmed or for any reason you have to step outside, you need help, we do have people who are professionals in the field, and they will watch out for you. So there was a young woman who did get overwhelmed, and Jeff called me over and asked me, please take her outside. And I did, and I talked to her a while. It took a while, but I calmed her down. She just, and apparently this happens to her repeatedly. So, but you do find people that are very, very sensitive to this and do get emotionally overwhelmed with it. But Jeff himself doesn't have negative experiences. He has an 8-year-old daughter who was recently asking about a spirit form that, how does she know this? I've never talked to her about this. That she sees something in a room or something like that. But he himself, he's a researcher. He's not a demonologist. He's not a psychic. He calls himself a researcher. And he's very well grounded. He finds this very interesting, and he does very well for himself in doing legend trips, as he calls them, where that's obviously that's a connotation that means people love these legends and they want to go tripping on them. They want to go investigating them. So that's why he does his legend trip series. That's what we were helping him out with, and that is my personal belief that Satan is a person. He's a persona, and he's was once a heavenly prince, ordained by God, and now he's an unholy prince. He's the prince of devils, and they seek the ruin of mankind. But they're very clandestine. They're very behind the scenes. Most people will not experience one of these spirits full on because they do like to remain anonymous. They do remain hidden. Otherwise, they'd be exposed, and everybody would believe in them. So not everybody lives in a Conjuring house. Or an Amityville house or what have you.
Keith, are there misconceptions out there about demonology that we should clear up?
Yes, there are. I'm pretty well known as a demonologist now, but for a long time, obviously, I couldn't talk about this in public. Obviously, demonologist, that means somebody who studies demons. That's simply it. And I believe every demonologist obviously should be an angelologist as well. I'm somewhat knowledgeable. I'm very knowledgeable about angels and demons, but that's not boasting, because this is a whole unseen realm, and you realize just how little we actually know about this unseen realm that most people don't directly experience. So we just know, any of us, the most knowledgeable person among us just knows the basics, because that's what's revealed to us. But I do know these spirits exist. One thing, when somebody says demonologist, and I know Ed Warren had to deal with this, that you summon demons. Well, some demonologists do use that knowledge to try to summon demons. I mean, the wise men who came to see the Christ child, the Magi as they're called, and of course the name Magi, that's where we get the name magic. These people were astronomers. They were early astronomers. They were also astrologers, and they themselves were also demonologists. Most likely they had a pretty good knowledge of the spirit realm, a vast knowledge of the spirit realm. But the name demonologist, for a long time, till it became popularized, seemed to connotate somebody. You said you were a demonologist. Well, you call up spirits. That's what you do. You're very evil. You're very strange. And so I always say I preference it with religious demonologists. And of course, I hope people don't take that to mean I'm holier than I am. But it's it's just I'm a religious demonologist. That makes them think I'm Father Merrin and stuff like that. But no, just I put that prefix there to show that I do approach it from a religious standpoint, that I'm not using it just out of curiosity or to gain power to try to summon demons. And my brother, during the years of his research, he did not take as much of a religious stance as I did, and he was more like investigating and involved in occult practices for many years. And then, at least when we first started out, he would experiment with occult practices, and that's how we got our first EVP. He was experimenting, and we got an electric voice phenomena before we even knew what that term was. It's like he started attracting all these people. Yes, I need you to help me sell my soul to the devil. And, finally he told somebody, look, I'm not dial demon. I can't just summon these demons. And they're going to, but I mean, that is a lot of the misconception. People think that these demons are on call and they'll just, they'll do the whole Faustian thing. You can just summon a demon and will appear to you. And of course, that's a extremely, and thankfully, extremely rare phenomena that a demon will actually fully manifest.
Well, I do have to say, in this paranormal craze that we're in with all the TV shows and paranormal things, and there are a lot of people out there that claim to be a demonologist, or they're kind of scary, and they look, it's almost as if they're putting something on, and it's an act. And you are such a nice guy and so down to earth.
Thank you.
And so I think that's kind of cool. And I think people are way, way more willing to put their trust in you because you're just so, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I think so. Yes. Yeah, I think so. It's like, I don't claim that I have a certificate on my wall, a sheepskin that says I was trained at the Vatican or anything, and I try to make that clear to people that my title is not an official title. It could be an official title. Anybody can, if somebody wanted to do, and some people have chosen to do their PhD, they get their doctorate on demonology because it can be the field of your choice. But, I don't claim that I am, sanctioned by the Pope or by the Vatican. It's simply, this is my field of research, and I do approach it from a religious standpoint. I know there's the groups that I see here and there that somebody decides to get into the demonology aspect. When they're paranormal investigators, they decide that it might be a good idea to take that next step, and they start calling themselves a demonologist, and then they take it from there. Then they're going to get their knowledge bit by bit. But that could be very dangerous, because when they give themselves the connotation of demonologist, a lot of people are going to think, well, they're ready to step in to a full-blown demonic haunt. they are a demonologist. They are the experts. When we may be looked upon as experts, but even after all these years of studying and being involved in it, I hesitate to call myself an expert because there's just so much out there that in my finite state we just can't know. And so somebody calling themselves a demonologist that has just decided, okay, I'm going to be a demonologist, obviously they can call themselves that. But if their reputation gets around, they're going to be called in on these cases, and they should be ready to at least help or at least call in other people. And fortunately, I do have several people, usually at a time, that I'm mentoring. They say, Keith, I've decided, I feel I'm being called, I'm being led to investigate this aspect of the paranormal. Would you please help? And of course, I welcome that. I welcome that because that's gaining from somebody that has more experience than themselves. And like I would like to have done with Ed Warren. And Ed Warren, yes, I did look upon him, of course, as a role model. But it's not, I wish that I had actually gone on a multiple amount of cases with him and been nurtured by him and had him there with me. But I didn't. I was left to make the mistakes and, do this and that and do my own research. A lot of the research I did was on his writings and his experiences. But I kind of wished that he had been one-on-one to tutor me, but, just wasn't available.
Well, maybe you came out better this way.
Well, that's my wife tells me that, and that kind of reassures me that when she says that, and hearing you say that too, so that's reassuring to hear.
You're listening to the Big Séance Podcast with Patrick Keller. Look for us on iTunes and be sure to check out bigseance.com for more discussion.
I'd like to make a special request of you this week: some Paranerd homework. There are many different ways to listen to this show. Some of you listen at your computer, some listen on the go in the car, some of you listen through a podcatcher or other app on your phone or device, like Apple's podcast app. Every Apple device has it, and if you have an Android, there are podcast apps for you there as well. If you are not subscribed in iTunes or through an app, I encourage you and beg you to please subscribe. Not only does it mean that you won't miss an episode, since every episode is delivered to your device automatically, but in the case of iTunes and the Apple Podcast app specifically, it automatically lets the iTunes gods know that you are subscribed and listening to the show. And then the iTunes gods decide that we're worthy of showcasing on the iTunes page, which allows us to find brand new paranerds that don't yet know about the Big Séance Podcast. So here's your challenge. First, make sure you're subscribed. But then, grab a friend's phone, even if it's in secret. Even if it's when they get up to use the restroom at the restaurant. Although, if they're not into the paranormal, or maybe they're really big with muscles and could possibly beat you up or sit on you, then maybe that's not a good idea. But use your best judgment. Search for Big Séance Podcast in the app, hit subscribe, and then tell them how much they're going to love the show. And, get in touch with me and tell me how you did it. That would be funny. Give me your best story about how you subscribed a friend to the show. I'm cracking myself up right now. So I've heard from quite a few of you in the last couple of weeks. I've been in a nice email conversation with author D. Omran, who had interesting questions about psychics and mediums and a suggestion on a topic for a future show. So thank you, Mr. Omran. I heard from Matt, who was from the St. Louis area, and we talked about the topic of paranormal investigation. Christopher got in contact with me, and I found out we have a shared nerdy interest in psychomantiums, which we've covered a bit here on the show. I got an email from Julie, who shared some experiences she's had here in St. Charles, Missouri. This was after my Ghosts of St. Charles episode. And speaking of that episode, what did you guys think of the St. Charles episode of Ghost Hunters a few weeks ago? It was interesting. I heard from many that they were disappointed, and I was probably a little disappointed myself, but I wasn't incredibly vocal about that. But paranormal activity doesn't always happen on command, and even sometimes in haunted locations, there's no activity at all at the moment that you're there. And in this case, I think maybe they just investigated way too many locations at one time. I think they spent time in like 5 locations. So from what you can see on TV, at least, maybe they could have placed more focus in one main area. But I did go to the watch party to see the episode. It was kind of fun. It was really crowded, a really big event. I got to meet Michael Henry in person, talk to some skeptics that showed up, or maybe they were dragged, actually, now that I think about it. And I wanted to give a special shout out to Deb and Laura, some fun ladies who I had really nice conversations with throughout that evening. So thanks you two for keeping me company. All right, back to the rest of my conversation with Keith Johnson.
Thanks for joining us for the Big Séance Podcast. We'd better get back to the table while there's still some candlelight left.
So my question for you is, outside of the paranormal and demonology and everything that we know you for, what kind of nerd are you?
Hey, what kind of nerd am I?
Biggest question of the night, man.
Yeah. I'm a science fiction nerd. Into science fiction nerd and old Gothic stories, and I can start telling about these old Gothic stories and how they relate to modern science fiction, and that's another reason that I'm blessed with my wife in many ways, and one of those ways is that she has actually a lot of the same interest as me. She's a Doctor Who fan from way back, and like Star Wars and everything like that. But a lot of the things that, even the Three Stooges, she's a Three Stooges.
Nice.
How often do you see that in a woman? We sit at them, and it's so it's amazing. Well, we met in theater, so that shows we have something in common right there. We were in a local theater group, and that's how we met and fell in love, and so. We have a lot in common that we watch these, and of course I'll go over these stories. I'll say, of course we see the science fiction movies, we see the Frankenstein and everything, but I'll go back to the original novel and I'll tell her chapter by chapter. You see how this differs from our modern concept of Frankenstein. For example, Frankenstein was never a doctor. He was more like an alchemist. He was a scientist in looking for the elixir of life, but he was never a trained physician or anything. And you see the differences between where the movies take off, and obviously the monster's name wasn't Frankenstein. It was Dr. Victor Frankenstein. The monster had no name, and one of his references was demon, vile insect, a bored monster, things like that. So I'll go on these details and tell all, she never had to read Wuthering Heights because I've told her the whole story, and all different characters relate to this, and this had this baby, and this one separated from this one, and see how the different generations relate to each other. So yeah, I'll go on and on about that. So she doesn't have to do a lot of reading of those books because I just tell her the whole thing, So, so that's kind of the nerdish part of me, and it's like I try, and I always hope that have the other person's interest because I don't want to put anybody to sleep, so which could be easy to do if you're talking about Gothic horror novels.
So this is actually just kind of random. It popped in my brain. I was going to ask you earlier, what are the chances of getting you back on TV again? You had your early Ghost Hunters experiences, and I'm sure you've made little appearances in other things. Do you ever get called? We've
been on, of course, we were on Paranormal State too, and we've done some episodes of Paranormal State, and here and there I've made some guest appearances. Local public access, of course, we have our own show, Ghosts Are Near,
right?
As you know, and that's it's local public access, but it's on it's on our site and it's on YouTube. So we have, people internationally very, very interested in it. If only we got paid for the episode, I'd be able to retire right now.
Right.
We're always getting offers frequently. In fact, I'm in touch with a young producer now, and she's very interested in doing something with us. The thing is that we get a lot of offers, but very rarely do they lead any place. You get these. That's
I've
why
experienced some of those too, actually.
Have you really?
Yeah.
That's why I don't announce them on the internet, because I've had so many contemporary friends, especially in the paranormal, that oh boy, I'm contacting a producer and we're going to get together filming. And they tell us step by step what's happening, and if it doesn't go through, it's a letdown. So
yeah,
I'd wait till it was actually in production and being aired.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we get a lot of offers, and like I said, there's a young woman who's been contacting us. She's very, very interested in doing something with us, and who knows, that might go through. We'll give it a chance. But then again, the Paranormal Witness, they've done an episode on the true story of the Conjuring.
Oh,
and I heard that they were very interested in. In fact, it was Andrea herself that told me that they're very interested in talking to me, and it was the producers are in the UK. So I said, she's going to be calling you. She's very, very interested. She's so excited that I know somebody that was there before the Warrens that can tell the whole story. And so I waited for a call, and she didn't get back to me. Then when I called Paranormal Witness, it turned out that lady was no longer there.
Man.
So, and I talked to the lady that had taken over for her, but by then the episode was already filmed, and it's going to be on being shown on, I think it's Halloween week. But as far as I know, Pyro isn't, the group I was in, myself and Pyro was not mentioned in it. So yes, it's a true story of the Conjuring, but you still don't get that aspect of how the Warrens came in, in the first place. Yeah. So that's, it's the nature of the beast, so to speak. And so I'm hoping that this latest venture comes through, because the producer is very, very enthusiastic. She's very, very happy to get the chance to possibly work with us. But I mean, I won't publicly announce it until it happens, because I know what's happened to myself and a lot of other people too. So,
tell us about Paranormal Realities.
Yes, that's the book series I've done. Paranormal Realities. Book 1 is Paranormal Realities 2, and Paranormal Realities 3. These are all true stories from people I've known closely and myself. Most of them are my personal experiences. And that came about by, of course, we'd sit around at Starbucks or some local donut shop, coffee shop, and I'd be telling my fellow paranormal investigators about my experiences, and they'd be thrilled. Keith, you should, and especially my wife, Keith, you should write a book. You should write a book. And finally, my wife said, Keith, you're going to write a book about it. You're not just going to talk about it. You're going to write a book about it. So essentially, it's this chapters are in very conversational tones, and people, sometimes ask me, how do you remember this much detail? You remember exactly who said what where. So, well, that's because a lot of the times I was recording. I made sure to record in a lot of these situations I was in. So I do have a lot of the exact dialogue, and that I transcribed for these chapters. And so books 1, 2, and 3, and it really doesn't matter which one you start with. They're all cases that I've been involved with over the years. A lot of them have to do with TAPS, the Atlantic Paranormal Society. Mm-hmm. And I tell people who are fans of the show Ghost Hunters, well, this is a chance to see some things that happened behind the scenes, and some things that happened long before the TV show. I mean, the TAPS existed years before the TV show, and this is some of the things we did, some of the cases we went on, which were very, I think, a lot of them more interesting than was what was on the episodes, that's on the TV, because you didn't have the camera and action and everything going there like that. It was more natural. And so that's the books on Paranormal Reality. They were all, I've done the trilogy. I may do another one in time, because there's always more stories that I have to tell. Right now I'm working on a book on demonology. I don't know what to call it, but it's actually practical demonology, if there is such a thing, because it's it's such an intense, potentially dangerous field. But practical demonology, like it's practical plumbing or something like that. It makes it kind of trivializes it, so I don't want to call it that. But what it is I have a lot of people that ask me, that are in the field for advice. And, I've got the calls in the middle of the night, Keith, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm at this situation. So it's kind of like almost a handbook. And it's not meant to be some big theological, expertise and treatise or anything. It's what I've experienced, and this is what I've experienced. This is what you might expect to happen, and this is my advice: what to do then. What you can do. It's something like a reference manual, so to speak, and it has stories of what I've experienced and how I dealt with it. And sometimes I failed, and sometimes I was successful. And when I was successful, and when I failed, this was the reasons why. So somebody can really look for it for a reference.
So tell us where to find you and how someone could get in touch with you and all of that.
Well, Sandra and I are very accessible. You can find us at nearparanormal.com, www.near paranormal.com. That's our website. And anybody wants to get in touch with us, through our website, we're very accessible through the Near site. And watching episodes of Ghosts Are Near, if you want to see us up close and personal, that's, Ghosts Are Near. And we do make public appearances from time to time. And when we do, that's announced on Facebook. We're obviously Keith and Sandra Johnson on Facebook. And on our website, too, we announce our public appearances. And of course, ghost tours are coming up at Slater Mill. My brother and I run them. They're very, very popular, especially this time of year. And we have, private paranormal groups come in, too, and arrange things at Slater Mill because my brother and I work there as tour guides. So when we do something public, usually we let people know that we're going to be involved in this convention or something. We're coming up in November, the first weekend in November. We're going to be at local Rhode Island Comic-Con. So that's down in Providence, the Providence Civic Center. And it's going to be in a couple of buildings this time because obviously these Comic-Cons get huge, bigger and bigger every year.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you remember the controversy last year where so many people bought tickets and they had to be turned away. And
yep.
Steve Perry, the organizer, was very overwhelmed. I guess it's more than he could handle, but he's kind of made preparations this year so it doesn't happen like that again, and that people actually have to be turned away. So after they bought tickets, so that's we're going to be there at the first Saturday and Sunday in November. So, anybody wants to know where we are, just nearparanormal.com. And I have people that contact us through our case manager, on our site, too, if they want to get personal messages for us. But we're very easy to find out there. Just Google Keith or Sandra Johnson, anything, Paranormal Realities. Anyway, you New England Anomalies researcher will get to us.
I don't approach the topic of demonology very often, and I really appreciate the fact that you so open and honestly kind of helped educate my ignorance on the topic. And I, of course, wanted to hear how the early experiences of the farmhouse and clear a lot of that stuff up. So I really appreciate how nice, this conversation has been.
Oh, good. Well, it's a pleasure to talk with you. And the name Patrick Keller, I knew you had to be a cool guy,
Or a giant nerd, whatever.
Right. Well, that's the coolest kind,
So at the end of our interview, I asked Keith if he had anything he wanted to add. This is what he had to say.
Everybody, basically stay safe and don't be afraid to call upon somebody if you need to. I'm only one person, but that's what I'm here for. There's myself, there's John Zaffis, there's John Constantine, in Connecticut. There's a lot of people that you can, you don't have to be alone or feel it's overwhelming. There's if you want advice, there's always people to contact, and I encourage people to do that because, unlike me, I had Ed Warren, but there wasn't really anybody I could call on when I was first starting out. I couldn't just call on, and there's always somebody that if you need advice, you can always call on somebody. So just be aware that, keep that in mind, help is out there, and advice and encouragement.
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com, now the home of both the blog and the podcast. Just click on the Big Séance Podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Do you have any comments or feedback? Please contact me at patrick@bigseance.com. You can call my feedback line at 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. You can also record audio feedback right from the site using the SpeakPipe link included in the show notes. I could decide to include your voice in a future show. Thank you so much for listening and reading. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.
Are you still listening? Did you make it to the end? If you did, well, thank you. And go ahead and tweet me. Find me on Twitter. My handle is @BigSeance. And tweet me with the hashtag Paranerd. So that's PARANERD. Hashtag Paranerd. That'll let me know that you are a Paranerd and you made it through the whole episode. See you next time.